Hello everyone, welcome to Vijay CodeSet. In today's video, we are going to see what are the types of deployment mode available in Spark. In today's video, we are going to take a reference of our Spark architecture video. So if you haven't watched our Spark architecture video, please consider watching that video first. Also, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please consider subscribing as it gives us the motivation to give out the quality content. Let's begin. Let me quickly draw out the Spark architecture for you. This is the Spark architecture. To understand the components, please watch the Spark architecture video. In our Spark architecture video, we have seen that the developer communicates with the master node to get the drivers and executors. But what happens over here is, let's say if the developer is copying a data to one of the worker nodes. So the issue over here would be the developer has copied the data to the worker node, but it isn't replicated along the different executors. So that is kind of a drawback that if the developer has direct access to the cluster, uh, things may go wrong. Or if by chance, let's say the developer has copied the data on W1. So if our W1 nodes fails, in case of failure of node W1, we don't have the replica of the data copied by the developer on the node W1. And hence, due to that reason, our process may fail. So it is not recommended that we should give developer a direct access to the cluster. So what we do is we will be creating a edge node, and we won't give developer the direct access to the cluster. Instead, we will be giving developer the access of the edge node. Now, what happens is the developer will be accessing the edge node, and edge node will be having the access to the cluster. So if the developer want to run the code, he would be submitting on the edge node, and then it would be executed on the cluster. Few benefits of having the edge node is that we can check the access control on the edge node and the authentication of developer to run any kind of code on the cluster. So this is one of the advantage that edge nodes provides us to check the authentication and the access control. So this our edge node is also called as client and the cluster. Now let's talk in terms of client and cluster. So whenever we submit a Spark submit code, we decide master. What will our master be? So in our case, we are using yarn as our master node. We have different types of master node. Let's say it can be standalone, it can be Mesos, it can be Kubernetes. So we can use standalone Mesos Kubernetes as a resource manager in our master node. We have chosen yarn, and then we have to choose deploy mode. And we can have deploy mode as client or cluster. Let's understand the difference between client and cluster. So what happens is when we do deploy mode as client, our driver would be created on the client itself. So driver would be on the client, but the executors, let's say, are this, which I have drawn in red, would be created on the worker nodes. In case of client and cluster, both the executors would always be on the worker nodes. The difference would be in the driver node. So when we do deploy mode as client, we have the driver on the client itself, also the edge node. And when we do deploy mode as cluster, the driver is created within the worker node and the executors are created within the worker node as well. Let's say we have these three executors. Now let's talk advantage and disadvantage of deploy mode as client or cluster. So when we are doing deploy mode as driver, there would be a latency involved, because as we have seen in our video in which we were discussing broadcast join, that the driver sends out the data to the worker nodes when we are performing a broadcast join. And since we have the driver on our client node, the client would be communicating with the master. The client would be communicating with the cluster, which will be adding an extra latency as the driver is outside the cluster. But when we do deploy mode as cluster, the driver is present within the cluster, and hence due to that reason there would be less latency. The second point is that whenever the developer shuts down the client, all of the executors will be lost. So let's say driver has submitted a process and it's running. What will happen is, if the client is shut down, it will lose the connection with the cluster and the process will stop then and there itself. So if the deploy mode is client, we cannot shut down the client till the point our process is completed. But this is the advantage using the cluster mode, because even if we like shut down our computer, the process will be still up and running. The third point is that we can track the process. If we are using the client mode, we can track the process, as we have a screen and we can like physically check which step are we on. But when we are using the deploy mode as cluster, we like don't see physically, we can't see physically what exactly is going on. In fact, we get an application id, we get an id from cluster, and we can connect using that id on the web interface and then check how many processes has been successfully completed or we are getting any kind of error. So we have to take an extra step while using the cluster mode to track the progress of our code. And the other point is that when we are using client mode, we can easily get driver out of memory exception. To understand like why do we get driver out of memory exception, please watch our Spark memory management video. In that we have discussed why do we get driver out of memory exception. So yeah, continuing on it, when we use the client deploy mode, there is like more chance that we will be getting driver out of memory. It's not like that we won't get it in cluster mode. We can get a driver out of memory exception when we are using cluster mode as well, but there are more chances when we are using client mode. Let me explain. So let's say we have like the edge node or the client node of 100 GB, and there are like 10 developers in the company, and what all of the developers are doing is requesting 20 GB of driver from the client node. So what will happen is, there are 10 developers and requesting 20 GB of driver, that is equal to 200 GB of driver space. But our client or the edge node is capable of having 100 GB. In that case, some of the processes will start getting to fail and the client would throw out and driver out of memory exception. But if we are using the cluster mode, since we have multiple clusters, the driver would be created on different clusters. Due to that reason, we won't be getting driver out of memory exception due to extra requests. So these were like few advantages and disadvantages of using client or cluster mode. They have like both of their own advantages and disadvantages. So mostly when we are in debugging mode, we use like deploy mode as cluster, as we need to see frequently that what error are we getting and to quickly fix it and push it to production. Due to that reason, we use client mode on debugging, and to push it into production we use cluster mode. Let me quickly write it out for you, the advantages and disadvantages of using the client or cluster mode. Firstly, client has high network latency, as like the driver mode is on the client and we need to send the data from driver to the worker nodes. In that case, the latency is high, and it is totally opposite for the cluster mode. So we will be writing only for client. You can assume it totally opposite for the cluster mode. Second point is driver out of memory can be seen easily. In our example, we saw that if there are 10 developers requesting 10 GB of 20 GB of data from the client, and there is like 100 GB of space in our client, we would be getting driver out of memory exception. And server can be disconnected if driver is gone. So if we lose the connection from the client to the cluster, executors would shut down and the process would terminate then and there itself. And the fourth, we use the advantage is that it is used to debug. Today's video might be like super confusing. I would recommend that watch this video once again. If you are having any doubt, you can drop comment anytime. I would be happy to help. That's it for today's video. Thank you for watching.